Now, earlier this week, Nigel Farage vowed not to be bullied or cowed after a protester threw objects at him during an open-top bus tour through Barnsley. Let's just take a look at that. For those listening on the radio, you then see police officers cart the protester away. Nigel Farage then addressed the attack on him during a speech in Great Yarmouth and said he would not surrender to the mob. But MPs are facing unprecedented threats to their safety. So what can be done? To discuss this, I'm joined now by the former Labour MP and independent advisor to the government on political violence and disruption, Lord Walney. Nice to see you this morning, Lord Walney. Thank you for joining me. I mean, it's quite sad, actually, and depressing that we're discussing this topic again on the 8th anniversary of Joe Cox's murder. I know you've written a report on this. You've looked at these matters very closely. On one day, it's a milkshake. On another day, it's pieces of cement. But it strikes me that MPs are facing unprecedented threats to their safety. Would you agree with that analysis?
Yes, I do. It is deeply alarming that the budget for the protection of members of parliament has had to be so greatly increased in recent months and is now being extended to all candidates at the election campaign. You've got MPs and now candidates who are being told it's not safe for them to use public transport. Candidates are now routinely having to log their campaign events with the police to ensure that there can be a police presence. And you've got the extraordinary situation where a number have had to be given the kind of close protection that actually has only usually been offered to very senior ministers in national security roles, like Home Secretary and Defence Secretary. All of us remember this time 8 years ago, I think many of us were watching the football, England-Wales, when the awful news about our friend Joe being killed. We've had Sir David Amos, who's been stabbed, murdered since then. And unfortunately, the threat level remains extremely high for people on the front line of politics.
Are you confident that MPs are getting the right help and advice? Because we've seen, obviously, verbal attacks. That's quite commonplace. We've seen physical attacks like the ones on Farage recently. We've also seen MPs own homes and offices surrounded by mobs, particularly when it comes to those campaigning for pro-Palestinian sort of causes. Equally, we had Rosie Duffield, the Labour MP, saying that she couldn't attend her hustings in Canterbury this week because she feared the reaction from some campaigners in response to what she said about the transgender debate. And yet I've spoken to MPs and they feel there's an inconsistency when it comes to sort of parliamentary advice and guidance on security. Sometimes they have a surgery and there are people outside. Sometimes there are not. It's asking too much of the police to be policing every MP's surgery across the length and breadth of the land. But does more have to be done? Because it strikes me that they are becoming increasingly vulnerable.
Yeah, well, the constituency services across the country, as you say, do now need to be policed. That is the sad reality. But you're right that there is a real inconsistency and misunderstanding, and that can be within police forces. And I think the wider way in which all of us look at the right to protest and the right to freedom of speech. And I think too often, in laudably wanting to protect that, confuse the kind of aggressive intimidation that actually many MPs and candidates are being subjected to as an expression, a vital expression of democracy, where actually is an attempt to cow people unacceptably and often just make them afraid and try to intimidate them into doing what you want. And we should be much clearer that that kind of aggressive targeting of people is not acceptable. And I'd like to see the police doing more to be able to enforce that, particularly on the issue of mobs or activists that gather outside people's homes, and the way in which we've seen political meetings, local council meetings being stormed of late on issues that are completely unrelated to the agenda and in a highly aggressive and intimidating fashion should not be part of our democracy, and we should be firmer in saying no to it.
Look, you wrote a very thorough report on this entire issue, the right of political protest, where the line is drawn if it ends up turning into intimidation and harassment of MPs. What's happened to that report now? Because obviously when we last spoke on my show, that was before the election had been called. I think you had got positive mood music from the Conservatives that they wanted to adopt some of your recommendation. What happens now?
Well, I got the report finally published, and I had a good meeting with Home Office Minister at the time, and we were talking privately at the time about measures that they were going to bring forward quite quickly. And then within 24 hours, the general election was called. So I'm pleased that some of those measures are explicitly committed to by the Conservative Party in their manifesto. Labour, understandably, has said, look, we haven't been engaged, haven't had a chance to read this in the way that ministers have. They've been clear that they're going to go through it very carefully, and I'm really encouraged that they publicly and in conversation with me, they recognise the importance of being able to keep candidates safe, to be able to set the right boundaries so that we can protect the right to protest, which is sacrosanct in our democracy, but we can actually do so in a way which protects and can actually champion the society that we're lucky to live in, where we can decide our future through the ballot box rather than intimidating people in all the many ways that we're seeing at the moment.
Just to get you to put your former Labour MP hat on for a moment, this talk of a supermajority, this idea of a kind of electoral wipeout, could consign conservatism to the backbenches for some years to come. Do you worry that if there is that Labour supremacy in the House of Commons, that the debate gets overtaken just by left-wing voices and the right might be increasingly shut out?
Well, I've been saying to Conservative people I know for some time that if you think there is going to be a Labour victory at this election, you actually should want them to win pretty big, because the danger of a narrow Labour majority is that rump of kind of Corbynite, very left-wing members of very left-wing MPs who remain part of the party can call the shots disproportionately. So actually, I think a bigger majority will help Labour in being able to set priorities for change in the country. Now, none of us had really anticipated quite what has been happening to the Tories and the potential size of the majority that is going to bring. But I think if you're on the Labour side, you need to be focused on how you can drive the kind of scale of change which is needed across our economy and our public services, which is difficult, and you want a majority to do that. And you probably think that the collapse of the Tory party is maybe, if you're being candid, a worrying thing, but probably is a you problem for the Conservatives rather than Labour's problem.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much, Lord Walney, for joining us this morning. Great to speak to you.